Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we are stepping away from the loud, rushing noise of the modern world and slipping backward through the centuries, finding our way into the quiet, candlelit workshops of the European Renaissance. When I sit in the quiet of my own room and reflect on this era, it strikes me that we often picture it in the bright, unforgiving light of history books filled with grand marble statues and towering cathedrals. But to me, the true heartbeat of the Renaissance did not happen in the bustling daylight. It happened at night. It happened in the deep, ink-black quiet, where the scent of aged parchment mixed naturally with the rich, earthy aroma of linseed oil, freshly carved wood, and crushed mineral pigments. In a world before electric streetlights, the darkness outside was absolute, acting as a heavy, protective blanket over the cities of Italy and Germany. Inside these isolated workshops, a solitary wax candle resting on a wooden desk became a tiny beacon of pure, uninterrupted creation. I find it truly fascinating how the isolation of those long nights birthed ideas that would eventually wake up the entire world. But for now, the world is asleep, and we are simply sitting in the corner of the room, watching the slow, methodical work of the master craftsman. Let us begin by listening. Beneath the steady breathing of the city outside, there is a new sound taking root in these workshops. It is a slow, rhythmic ticking. Before this era, time was something measured by the silent, creeping shadow of a sundial, or the gentle, trickling flow of water in a glass basin. Time was soft, fluid, and imprecise, but in the 15th century, human hands began to capture time in small, spring-driven clocks. Imagine standing in a master horologist's sanctuary. The wooden floorboards creak ever so slightly beneath your feet as you approach a heavy oak work table. Spread across the grain of the wood are dozens of tiny, meticulously filed brass gears, glowing like scattered gold coins in the flickering candlelight. The inventor, a man with tired but intensely focused eyes, uses a pair of iron tweezers to place a tiny toothed wheel into a larger mechanical housing. He holds his breath, and so do we, as the pieces lock together. A gentle turn of a mainspring, and then a heartbeat. A mechanical heartbeat. Click, click, click. There is something incredibly soothing about that mechanical rhythm. It is the sound of human patience. It is the realization that a problem has been solved through hours, days, and perhaps years of quiet, repetitive labor. I often wonder what it felt like to be the first person in human history to hear a machine keep a steady, artificial rhythm completely independent of the sun or the rivers. It must have felt like holding a tiny, living universe in the palm of your hand. We leave the clockmaker to his rhythmic piece and drift southward, over the sleepy, terracotta roofs of Florence, Italy. The night air here is warmer, carrying the faint scent of crushed olives and damp river stones from the Arno River. We glide through an open wooden window shutter and enter a space cluttered with the magnificent chaos of a wandering mind. This is the realm of Leonardo da Vinci. He is not painting tonight. Instead, he sits heavily in a beautifully carved, high-backed wooden chair, his fingers gently tracing the smooth curves of a very strange, shimmering object resting on his lap. It is a silver lyre, but not one of traditional design. True to his nature, Leonardo has reimagined the instrument. He has sculpted it in the precise shape of a horse's skull. I always smile when I think of this. It shows a mind that simply could not accept the ordinary. He built the lyre mostly of pure silver, because he understood, through endless nocturnal studies of sound waves and vibrations, that silver would produce a louder, more resonant, and significantly clearer acoustic tone than traditional wood. Watch his hands. They are stained with sepia ink and charcoal dust, yet they move across the silver strings with incredible tenderness. He plucks a single string. The sound is deep, rich, and slightly metallic, vibrating through the quiet room and echoing off the plastered stone walls, which are covered in sketches of flying machines, human anatomy, and botanical wonders. The vibration of the silver lyre seems to linger in the air, a long, sustained hum that gently massages the mind. Leonardo tilts his head, listening not just to the music, but to the physics of the sound, watching how the vibration disturbs the dust motes dancing in the warm glow of his oil lamp. This is the essence of his genius. He did not separate art from engineering or music from mathematics. To him, the universe was one giant interconnected puzzle, and he was gently feeling the edges of the pieces in the dark. As the beautiful, mournful note of the silver lyre fades into the heavy curtains of his studio, we notice a massive, ancient text resting on his desk. Its leather cover is worn smooth from years of turning. The pages are heavy vellum, thick and soft to the touch. This book, and thousands like it across Europe, are about to change forever. The transition of knowledge from the slow, painstaking scratching of a monk's quill pen to something entirely new is already brewing in a different part of the continent. But here in Florence, the night is still dedicated to the hand-drawn line, the carefully mixed oil paint, and the soft strumming of silver strings in the dark. We will stay here for just a little while longer, letting the smell of beeswax and the rhythmic hum of the master's thoughts settle deep into our bones, slowing our heart rate and preparing us for a long, peaceful journey through the minds of the past. But as the Italian night deepens, our journey carries us northward, crossing the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Alps, descending into the crisp, biting cold of the Rhine Valley. We find ourselves in Mainz, Germany. The air here is entirely different. Gone is the warm scent of olive groves and the soft strumming of silver strings. Instead, the night air is thick with the sharp, industrial tang of melting metal, wood smoke, and the distinctly earthy, almost sweet smell of a very specific, new kind of ink. When I think about Johannes Gutenberg, I don't picture a grand visionary standing on a podium. I picture a man with blackened fingernails and aching shoulders standing in a freezing room, stubbornly refusing to go to sleep. Let us step inside his workshop. The stone walls are thick, built to keep the brutal German winter at bay, and the hearth in the corner burns with a low, steady orange fire, casting long, dancing shadows across a massive, intimidating wooden structure in the center of the room. This is the printing press. It looks less like an instrument of enlightenment and more like a medieval wine press, which, of course, is exactly what its design was based upon. It is heavy, imposing, constructed of thick oak beams bound with iron. Nearby, Gutenberg and a trusted apprentice are bent over a slanted wooden desk. They are setting type. I find it deeply mesmerizing to watch this process. It is a quiet, deliberate choreography. The apprentice's fingers, calloused and stained completely black, reach into a wooden case containing hundreds of tiny, individual metal letters. Each letter has been cast from a precise alloy of lead, tin, and antimony. A secret recipe Gutenberg spent years perfecting, so it would cool quickly and withstand the crushing pressure of the press. The apprentice picks up a single lowercase letter and places it into a handheld composing stick. Click, 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 the tiny metal blocks slide together with a satisfying, muffled clinking sound. In our modern age of instant digital text, appearing silently on glass screens, it is almost impossible to truly appreciate the sheer physical weight of a single sentence. In the 15th century, every single word was a physical object you could hold in your palm. Once a full page is arranged, locked tightly into a heavy iron frame, called a chase, it is carried over to the press. The ink is not the thin, watery substance used by monks. It is a thick, viscous paste made from boiled linseed oil and soot collected from oil lamps. Gutenberg takes a pair of large, mushroom-shaped leather balls, stuffed with sheep's wool. He dabs them into the black paste and begins to beat them rhythmically across the raised metal letters. Thump, 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 thump. The sound is dull, steady, and hypnotic like a very slow heartbeat, echoing against the stone walls. A large, slightly dampened sheet of rough, handmade paper is carefully laid over the inked metal. Then comes the moment of truth. Gutenberg grasps the thick, polished wooden handle of the screw mechanism. He leans his entire body weight into it. We can hear the massive oak beams groan under the immense pressure. The iron screw squeaks slightly as it descends, forcing the paper down onto the ink with bone-crushing force. He holds it there for a long, breathless moment. The whole room seems to freeze in anticipation. Then he pulls the lever back. The screw rises. He gently peels the paper away from the metal. Even in the dim light of the hearth fire, the resulting image is stunning. Crisp, perfect, identical black letters march in straight, disciplined lines across the textured paper. It is flawless. I can only imagine the mixture of profound exhaustion and absolute triumph washing over him in that moment. He is not just pressing ink onto paper, he is pressing human thought into a form that can travel the world, outliving the minds that conceived it. The freshly printed page is carefully lifted and hung on a string, stretched across the ceiling, to dry, joining a dozen others, swaying gently in the warm draft of the fire. They look like pale white bats sleeping in the rafters. The smell of the drying oil ink is heavy and comforting, a scent that will soon drift into libraries and universities across the globe, waking up a continent. But for tonight, the printing press continues its slow, rhythmic labor. The metal clinks. The leather balls thump. The oak beams groan. It is a lullaby of industry, a heavy, rocking cadence that invites us to let go of our own waking thoughts and sink deeper into the heavy, comforting blanket of history, the heavy, rocking cadence of the printing press slowly fades into a softer, more fluid rhythm. We leave the frosty chill of the German winter behind, drifting effortlessly south once more, this time following the ancient trade routes, until we reach the dark, shimmering waters of the Venetian lagoon. The air here is entirely different. It is thick, salty, and heavy with the smell of the sea, wet timber, and damp limestone. It is well past midnight, and the grand, ornate palaces of Venice are silent, their beautiful arched facades wavering gently in the dark reflections of the canals. But we are not stopping in the main city. We are gliding across the open, black water toward the island of Murano, the strictly guarded sanctuary of the world's most masterful glassmakers. I have always found the history of Murano fascinating, almost secretive. The Venetian Republic guarded the secrets of perfectly clear glass so fiercely that these master glassblowers were actually forbidden from leaving the island under penalty of death. They were highly respected, wealthy, but ultimately prisoners of their own incredible genius, bound to the fiery furnaces that dotted the island. As our small wooden gondola bumps gently against the worn stone dock, we can already hear the distant, continuous roar of a massive furnace. The sound is like a captive beast, breathing heavily in the night. We walk down a narrow cobblestone alleyway, our footsteps muffled by the dense sea fog rolling in from the Adriatic. We step through a heavy wooden doorway and into a workshop that feels like the very heart of a volcano. The intense heat hits us immediately, a dry, baking, heavy warmth that instantly chases away the damp night chill. In the center of the vast room stands a massive dome-shaped brick furnace, glowing fiercely from within. This is not just a simple fire. It is a carefully controlled, raging inferno fed by special hardwood to reach unfathomable temperatures. A master glassblower, an older man with a face shining with sweat and lit entirely by the intense orange glare, steps up to the glowing opening. He wields a long, heavy, hollow iron blowpipe, with the practiced grace of a dancer who has performed the same routine for decades. He dips the heavy iron rod deep into the crucible of molten glass, hidden inside the roaring flames. When he pulls the rod back out, a glowing, viscous sphere of liquid fire clings to the end of the iron. It looks exactly as if he has reached into the cosmos and captured a small, dying star on the end of a stick. The light it casts is mesmerizing, painting the soot-stained brick walls and the exhausted faces of his assistants in brilliant shades of amber and gold. He does not blow into the pipe yet. Instead, he moves to a thick, perfectly flat slab of iron, resting on a wooden barrel, and begins to roll the glowing mass of glass back and forth. The sound is a sharp, sizzling hiss, accompanied by a sudden, bright shower of tiny orange sparks that leap into the air and quickly die out on the cold stone floor. We are not watching him make an ornamental vase, a fragile chandelier, or a decorative drinking goblet tonight. We are watching the birth of something far more profound. Something that will change the way human beings interact with knowledge. We are watching the creation of a reading lens. As the molten glass is rolled against the iron slab, it begins to cool ever so slightly, shifting in color from a blinding, almost painful white to a deep, rich cherry red, and finally to a thick, transparent, glassy solid. An apprentice, a young man, wearing a leather apron to protect himself from the intense heat, steps forward, holding a pair of heavy iron shears. It is amazing to think that before these small, curved discs of polished glass were perfected, an aging scholar, a master artist, or a brilliant inventor simply had to stop working when their eyesight naturally began to fail. The invention of wearable spectacles essentially gave human beings back their most productive years, allowing them to read Gutenberg's newly printed books or draw intricate mechanical blueprints long into the twilight of their lives. The apprentice snips the cooling glass with a sharp, metallic crunch, separating a thick chunk from the iron blowpipe. The master craftsman takes the cooled, rough piece of clear glass with a pair of iron tongs and carries it away from the deafening roar of the main furnace. He moves into a quieter, darker corner of the workshop, where the air is slightly cooler and smells heavily of wet stone and crushed sand. He sits down at a heavy wooden workbench fitted with a spinning, grinding stone. The stone is powered by a steady, rhythmic wooden foot pedal that he pumps smoothly with his leather boot. Squeak, thump, squeak, thump. He dips the rough glass into a shallow wooden bowl filled with water mixed with fine, gritty sand, and then presses it gently against the spinning stone edge. The roaring sound of the furnace is instantly replaced by a soft, continuous grating, a soothing, repetitive hum of friction. Water drips slowly from the grinding stone, catching the dim, wavering light of a nearby oil lamp. He grinds the glass with infinite patience, shaping the delicate convex curve, using only the sensitive pads of his thumbs to feel for imperfections. He stops frequently, wiping the wet lens with a soft, faded linen cloth, holding it up close to the flickering yellow flame of the oil lamp to check its clarity and the way it bends the light. The stray water droplets hiss softly as they fall near some stray hot coals scattered on the floor. It is a deeply peaceful space of elemental transformation. We have fire, water, earth in the form of sand, and human breath, all combining perfectly to create a tool that literally bends the light of the universe to human will. We will linger here in this dim corner for just a little while longer, letting the rhythmic spinning of the wet grinding wheel, the gentle squeak of the wooden foot pedal, and the distant, muffled roar of the glass furnace wash over us, carrying our minds deeper and deeper into a state of total, heavy relaxation. The gentle, rhythmic spinning of the wet grinding wheel slowly fades into the distance as we drift away from the Venetian lagoon, carrying our newly born lenses northward once again. This time, our journey takes us high up into the freezing, star-swept skies of Poland. We are ascending the winding, incredibly narrow stone staircase of an ancient cathedral tower in the city of Torun. The air here is bitterly cold, biting at our cheeks, and it carries the dusty, dry scent of ancient stone, cold iron, and nesting pigeons. But as we reach the very top room, a heavy oak door stands slightly ajar, revealing a pocket of warm golden light, spilling out onto the dark stone landing. We step inside. This is the quiet, secluded sanctuary of the astronomer Nicolaus Copernicus. When I think about the sheer intellectual courage it took to stand in the dark and mentally rearrange the entire universe, it leaves me in a state of absolute awe. It was not accomplished with massive, shining telescopes or roaring rockets. It was done right here, in a freezing, drafty room, with nothing but a sharp mind, a few brass instruments, and infinite, quiet patience. The wind howls mournfully outside, rattling the heavy, iron-banded wooden shutters, but inside, the atmosphere is utterly still, anchored by deep concentration. Copernicus is wrapped tightly in a thick, dark brown fur cloak, standing beside a large, slanted wooden reading desk. He is not looking through a glass tube. Those tools have not yet fully evolved, but he is holding a magnificent, heavy brass astrolabe. The astrolabe catches the wavering light of a nearby smoking tallow candle. It is a stunning, complex web of precisely engraved metal plates, spinning dials and intricate mathematical markings. He lifts it carefully, aligning its heavy, freezing brass edge with a narrow vertical slit he has intentionally opened in the wooden window shutter. He is measuring the exact angle of a pale, distant star against the invisible horizon line. His breath forms tiny, white, ghost-like clouds in the freezing air, drifting slowly toward the candle flame before vanishing. The brass is so incredibly cold, it must ache his bare fingers to hold it. Yet his hands remain perfectly, resolutely steady. There is a profound, almost heavy loneliness in this kind of nocturnal work, but also a deep, unshakable peace. He is entirely disconnected from the sleeping, breathing city far below him, engaged instead in a silent, mathematical conversation with the heavens themselves. He lowers the heavy brass instrument and steps slowly back over to his desk, the heavy leather soles of his shoes scraping softly against the stone floor. I often imagine how much those beautifully ground glass lenses from Murano would have comforted him here, though Copernicus himself had to rely entirely on his own straining, tired eyes in the dim light. He reaches out and picks up a long, brilliantly white swan feather quill, dips the tip deep into a small, heavy iron inkwell, and begins to draw. Scritch, scratch, scritch, the sound of the stiff quill nib dragging across the rough, heavy grain of the thick parchment is immensely satisfying. It is a dry, whispering sound, rhythmic and constant, like a small mouse scurrying through dry autumn straw. He is drawing a series of large, perfect concentric circles, not with the earth sitting heavily at the center, as the entire world has firmly believed for over 1,000 years, but with the sun, in the absolute quiet of the night, with nothing but the scratch of a feather pen. He is quietly, methodically, moving the earth. The circular room is heavily cluttered with the physical, tangible tools of this monumental shift in human thought. Heavy, solid wooden globes wrapped in delicately painted paper maps rest in the shadows on the floor. Stacks of thick, leather-bound astronomical tables, heavy with thousands of handwritten numbers and calculations, threaten to tip over from the crowded corners of his desk. A beautiful, skeletal armillary sphere, a physical three-dimensional model of the cosmos made of interlocking, polished wooden rings, sits on a pedestal nearby, casting complex, looping, cage-like shadows across the curved stone wall. Let us stand here with him for a while longer. We can close our eyes and listen to the low, continuous howl of the winter wind outside the thick stone walls, feeling completely safe, secure, and warm within the heavy fur cloak of history. We are slowly lulled into a deep, meditative state by the steady, rhythmic scratching of his quill, tracing the eternal, slow-moving paths of the stars as the world slumbers on. The scratching of the astronomer's quill gently fades into the howling winter wind, and we let the cold Polish night slip away behind us. As we drift southward again, the biting frost softens into a mild, damp evening in the vibrant university city of Padua, Italy. We are moving from the vast, immeasurable expanse of the cosmos down into a universe that is entirely different, yet just as complex and mysterious. We are entering the quiet, shadowed chambers of Andreas Vesalius, the man who is quietly mapping the intricate, hidden geography of the human body. When I think about the courage it took to challenge centuries of established medical doctrine, relying solely on what the eyes could actually see, rather than what old texts claimed, it feels profoundly similar to Copernicus moving the sun. Both men simply looked at the universe with fresh, unclouded vision. The room we enter smells deeply of burning camphor, dried lavender, and the sharp, metallic tang of brass instruments. It is a large, vaulted stone room, previously a monastic cellar, now repurposed for the quiet study of anatomy. The heavy oak shutters are tightly closed, blocking out the lively sounds of the Italian streets. In the center of the room, upon a long, solid wooden table, lies a complex array of incredibly delicate tools. There are fine silver scalpels, small iron retractors, and beautifully polished bone saws, all arranged with mathematical precision upon a piece of soft, dark velvet. Vesalius is standing beside a large, angled wooden drafting board. He is not dissecting tonight. Tonight is for translating the physical truth of muscle and bone into ink and paper. He is a meticulous man, leaning closely over a massive, breathtakingly detailed woodcut block. The block is made from a thick piece of dense, smooth pearwood. This is how the magnificent anatomical drawings of his great work, the Fabrica, will be printed. He holds a tiny, razor-sharp steel gouge, its wooden handle resting comfortably in the palm of his hand. He is carving the impossibly fine lines of a human hand, muscle fiber by muscle fiber, into the hard wood. Scrape, tap, scrape. The sound of the sharp steel peeling away microscopic slivers of pearwood is incredibly soothing. It is a slow, methodical, deeply focused sound. A tiny curl of wood falls away from the gouge, catching the warm, golden light of the tall beeswax candles surrounding his workspace. It is mesmerizing to watch him work. He does not rush. Every single stroke of the blade represents an absolute devotion to truth. He pauses frequently, wiping the surface of the wood with a soft linen cloth to clear the dust, then leans back to compare his carving with a highly detailed, incredibly complex anatomical drawing resting on a wooden stand nearby. The drawing is a masterpiece of charcoal and red chalk, showing the human form not as a static object, but posed dramatically, as if the muscles are still alive and in motion. There is a strange, profound beauty in this quiet room. It is a place where death is treated not with fear, but with an intense, quiet reverence, a profound respect for the divine engineering of the human vessel. We watch as he dips a small, fine-bristled brush into a pot of dark ink, gently touching it to the carved lines to test their depth and clarity. The ink settles into the deep grooves, revealing the perfect, intricate network of tendons he has just immortalized in wood. The smell of the raw pear wood mixes with the sweet scent of the melting beeswax, creating a heavy, tranquil atmosphere. Let us stay here in the warm, quiet shadows of Padua for just a little while longer. The slow, rhythmic scraping of the steel gouge against the wood, the soft rustle of linen, and the steady, calm breathing of the anatomist combine into a deeply peaceful cadence, anchoring our minds and allowing our bodies to sink further and further into a state of profound, uninterrupted rest. The profound, uninterrupted rest we found in Padua slowly lifts, carrying us upward into the cool, dark night. We leave the careful mapping of the human body behind and drift across the snow-dusted peaks of the Alps once more, finding our way into the wealthy, bustling merchant city of Nuremberg, Germany. In the autumn of 1492, the narrow, winding streets are completely silent, paved with heavy cobblestones that hold the deep chill of the evening air. We glide effortlessly through the thick, timber-framed walls of an artisan's workshop. Inside, the air is thick and warm, filled with a strange, sweet, and distinctly earthy aroma. It is the smell of wet parchment, warm rabbit skin glue, and the sharp metallic dust of crushed minerals. Here, in the dim flickering light of a dozen oil lamps, a man named Martin Behaim is quietly building a world. I find it truly fascinating how human beings have always possessed this deep, innate desire to hold the entire universe in their hands. While Copernicus was looking up at the immeasurable stars, and Vesalius was looking inward at our own complex physical forms, Behaim was trying to capture the sheer, overwhelming scale of the Earth itself, shrinking it down into something a person could gently spin with a single finger. He is constructing what will become known as the Erdapfel, or the Earth Apple, the oldest surviving terrestrial globe in history. The workshop is a beautiful, organized chaos of exploration and cartography. Huge, rolled maps of the known trade routes hang heavily from wooden racks on the low ceiling. On a sturdy, circular oak table in the center of the room sits the globe itself, resting on a beautifully forged iron stand. It is just over 20 inches in diameter, a hollow sphere meticulously crafted from layers of heavily glued linen and hardened papier-mâché. Behaim stands before it, a quiet, focused silhouette against the warm glow of the lamps. He is dressed in a thick wool doublet, his eyes narrowed in deep concentration. He is holding a small, delicate brush made of incredibly fine badger hair. He leans in closely, studying a flat sheet of expensive vellum, covered in intricate, hand-drawn coastlines. He is in the delicate process of transferring these flat, two-dimensional lines onto the curved surface of the sphere. It requires absolute, unyielding precision. He dips the brush into a small porcelain cup filled with a rich, vibrant blue pigment made from ground lapis lazuli, a precious stone imported from the distant mountainous regions of Afghanistan. He touches the brush to the globe, carefully painting the deep blue expanse of the ocean. The wet paint shimmers in the lamplight, making the tiny painted sea look almost liquid and alive in the dark room. Listen to the soft, wet sound of the brush bristles gliding over the dried, curved papier-mâché. It is a soft, sweeping sound, like a gentle evening wind moving through tall grass. Swish, swish, swish. There is a deeply meditative, hypnotic quality to this slow, continuous application of color. He is painting a world that is completely unaware of the massive, hidden continents resting quietly in the dark across the Atlantic. Continents that other explorers are sailing toward at this exact moment in history. It is a beautifully incomplete world he is painting. A snapshot of human understanding, frozen perfectly in time, crafted with absolute sincerity and profound skill. He sets down the Baggager hairbrush with a soft tap against the wooden table and picks up a small, sharp wooden stylus. He dips it into a heavy iron pot of pure, liquid gold leaf. With infinite, steady patience, he begins to add tiny, glittering dots along the painted coastlines to represent the great spice ports of the East. The gold catches the flickering yellow flame of a nearby candle, sparkling like a tiny, grounded constellation resting against the dark blue paint. The slow, deliberate placement of each golden dot is a rhythm of pure, isolated focus. Tap, tap, tap. We can feel our own heartbeats slowing to match the steady, careful rhythm of his work, sinking deeper into the heavy, peaceful atmosphere of the workshop. The smell of the warm glue, the sight of the shimmering blue and gold, and the soft, sweeping sounds of creation wrap around us like a thick, comforting blanket. Let us watch him gently turn the globe on its iron axis, the soft, low creak of the metal adding a final note to the quiet symphony of the night. As he prepares to paint a new ocean, the low, metallic creak of the globe's iron stand gently fades into the quiet distance, and we allow the warm, glowing light of the German mapmaker's workshop to softly dissolve into the shadows of history. As we drift further along the river of time, we travel south toward the towering, pine-covered mountains of Zurich, Switzerland. It is the year 1565, and a cold, steady rain is falling outside, drumming a heavy, hypnotic rhythm against a thick glass window pane. We are stepping into the deeply fragrant, deeply solitary wooden study of a man named Conrad Gesner. The air in this room is completely different from the places we have visited before. It does not smell of hot metal, wet glass, or oil paint. Instead, it is intensely, wonderfully earthy. The rafters are hung with hundreds of drying botanical specimens, bunches of wild sage, delicate alpine ferns, and long stalks of lavender. The scent is a rich, calming herbal tea that instantly soothes the lungs and quietens the mind. Gesner is a physician and a naturalist, a man whose life is dedicated to cataloguing every single plant and animal in the known world. But tonight, it is not his vast encyclopedia of nature that draws our attention. It is the remarkably simple, incredibly quiet tool he is holding in his hands. When I reflect on all the grand, imposing inventions of the Renaissance, the massive printing presses and the roaring glass furnaces, I find it deeply comforting, almost touching, to witness the birth of something so intimately small, yet profoundly universal. For centuries, if a scholar or an artist wanted to draw, they relied on a feather quill that required constant dipping into messy, staining ink, or a silver point stylus that could only leave a faint, permanent scratch on specially prepared paper. But recently, deep in the damp hills of Borrowdale, England, a massive deposit of a strange, dark, incredibly smooth mineral was discovered. They called it plumbago, or black lead. We know it today as pure, raw graphite. Gesner sits in a deeply carved wooden chair, enveloped in a heavy wool robe to ward off the damp Swiss chill. In front of him, illuminated by a single steady beeswax candle, lies a piece of raw, dark grey graphite. He is holding a small, razor-sharp steel knife and a small block of soft, fragrant cedar wood. He carefully slices the wood into two long, perfectly flat halves, and then carves a tiny, shallow groove down the center of one piece. With absolute, unhurried precision, he takes a thin, fragile stick of the dark graphite and gently rests it perfectly inside the wooden groove. He applies a thin layer of warm animal glue, presses the second half of the cedar wood on top, and tightly binds the entire thing in a piece of rough hemp string to let it dry. He is making the very first modern wooden pencil. There is no grand ceremony, no roaring crowds. Just a quiet man in a rainy, herb-scented room, creating a tool that will eventually rest in the hands of every schoolchild, architect, poet, and dreamer for centuries to come. He reaches for a pencil he crafted earlier in the day, the glue now fully set, the string removed, the tip carefully sharpened to a fine dark point with his knife. I always imagine the absolute relief he must have felt. No more spilled ink pots, ruining weeks of research. No more stopping every 3 seconds to redip a quill. Just a pure, uninterrupted flow of thought. From the mind to the hand to the page, he pulls a fresh, thick sheet of woven paper toward him. Next to the paper sits a delicate, slightly wilted mountain tulip he collected earlier in the day. He holds the pencil and gently touches the dark tip to the paper. Listen to the sound it makes. It is completely unlike the dry, stiff scratching of a feather quill. It is a soft, velvety, continuous shh. It is the sound of a shadow being gently laid down upon the page. Swish, swish, shh. He sweeps the graphite back and forth, shading the delicate curve of the tulip's petal. The dark grey mineral glides effortlessly, catching the slight texture of the paper. It is an incredibly grounding, peaceful sound. As the cold Swiss rain continues to patter against the window glass, the soft, rhythmic sweeping of the pencil acts as a perfect, gentle lullaby. We can feel the tension leaving our own muscles, our breathing, slowing down to match the steady, sweeping motion of his hand, completely immersed in the simple, perfect act of drawing a flower in the quiet of the night. The soft, velvety sweeping of the graphite gradually fades into the dark, replaced by the distant, rhythmic crashing of the cold North Sea. We leave the damp, herbal warmth of the Swiss mountains behind us and travel far to the north, descending into the flat, fog-shrouded lowlands of the Netherlands. It is the late 16th century, and the coastal city of Middelburg is asleep, blanketed by a heavy, salty mist that rolls in off the ocean. We glide through the quiet cobblestone streets, stopping before a modest brick building with a wooden sign creaking softly in the damp wind. This is the workshop of a spectacle maker. But tonight, the work being done inside has absolutely nothing to do with correcting human vision. Tonight, vision is being entirely reinvented. We step inside. The room is incredibly cramped and smells strongly of burning peat from a small iron stove in the corner, mixed with the sharp, acidic tang of brass polish. A young Zacharias Janssen sits on a simple wooden stool, hunched closely over a scarred wooden workbench. He is illuminated by the steady, bright yellow flame of a single whale oil lamp. When I think about this specific moment in history, I am struck by how deeply it altered our understanding of reality. For all of human existence, we believed that if something was too small to be seen, it simply did not matter. We were completely unaware that we were walking through a dense, invisible jungle every single day of our lives. Janssen is holding a beautifully polished, cylindrical tube of brass. Actually, it is 3 separate tubes, carefully engineered to slide inside one another like a collapsible spyglass. Inside the ends of these tubes, he has carefully mounted 2 highly polished glass lenses. He places the heavy brass instrument onto a small 3-legged wooden stand. His hands are stained with polishing rouge, and his fingertips are calloused from years of grinding glass. But his movements are incredibly delicate. He reaches over to a small, folded piece of white parchment and uses a pair of tiny iron tweezers to pick something up. It is a simple, lifeless flea, barely a speck of dust to the naked eye. He places it carefully onto a small glass plate resting beneath the brass tube. Listen to the sound of the metal as he leans in. Scrape, slide. It is a slow, hollow, metallic sound as he twists and pushes the brass tubes, adjusting the distance between the 2 lenses. Slide, scrape, stop. He closes one eye and presses the other against the cold brass eyepiece. I can vividly imagine the sudden, sharp intake of breath he must have taken the very first time he saw it clearly. Through the magic of the convex and concave glass working together, the tiny, insignificant speck of dust is instantly transformed. It is no longer a speck. It is a towering, heavily armored creature with thick, hairy legs and complex, terrifying geometry. He pulls his eye away from the brass tube and sits back, staring at the instrument in profound silence. The peat fire in the iron stove crackles softly, a warm, comforting sound that grounds us in the quiet reality of the workshop. The brass tube catches the light of the oil lamp, gleaming like a piece of captured sunlight in the dark, smoky room. He has just opened a door into a microscopic universe, a hidden dimension that has always existed right beneath our fingertips. We will sit here in the heavy, warm shadows of the Dutch workshop for a while longer, letting the smell of the burning peat and the soft, metallic slide of the brass tubes lull our minds into a deep, uninterrupted state of wonder and peaceful rest. The soft, metallic slide of the brass tubes slowly dissolves into the thick Dutch fog, and we find ourselves lifting effortlessly into the night sky once again. We ride the high, cold currents of air back down across the continent, returning to the familiar, warm embrace of the Italian peninsula. We are in Padua once more, but the year is now 1609. The heavy, damp air of the lowlands is replaced by a crisp, perfectly clear Mediterranean night, carrying the faint, sweet scent of distant citrus groves and the dry dust of ancient terracotta rooftops. We glide gently onto a high, open-air stone balcony overlooking the sleeping city. Here, standing entirely alone under a vast canopy of glittering stars, is Galileo Galilei. When I stop to think about the incredible thread connecting human ideas, it truly astounds me. The very same sliding brass tubes and polished glass that Zacharias Janssen used to look down into a drop of water, Galileo has now lengthened, refined, and pointed entirely in the opposite direction. He is looking up. He is holding a long, slender tube made of wood and tightly bound in dark red leather. He steps carefully toward the edge of the stone balcony. The air is still, so quiet that we can hear the soft, rhythmic rustle of his heavy wool cloak brushing against the stone balustrade. He rests the long leather tube onto a simple, articulated wooden stand. His hands, worn from days of tirelessly grinding and polishing his own convex and concave glass lenses, gently grip the barrel of the instrument. He does not point it at the distant ships in the Venetian harbour, as the military commanders wished. Instead, he tilts the heavy wooden stand upward, aiming the glass directly at the glowing silver face of the waxing moon. Listen to the subtle, quiet sounds of discovery. Creak. Stop. The wooden hinge of the stand groans softly under the weight of the telescope. He closes his left eye and presses his right eye against the cold, polished bone ring of the eyepiece. I always try to imagine the sheer, overwhelming shock that must have hit him in that exact fraction of a second. For thousands of years, every philosopher, king, and priest on earth believed the moon was a perfectly smooth, flawless, unblemished sphere of heavenly ether. But in the quiet darkness of this balcony, looking through a few pieces of shaped sand, Galileo sees the undeniable, shocking truth. He sees jagged, towering mountain peaks, casting long, pitch-black shadows across a desolate grey landscape. He sees massive, circular craters carved into the stone. It is not a perfect heavenly body. It is a rough, battered, physical world, just like the one he is standing on. He slowly pulls his eye away from the lens. He does not shout. He does not run into the streets to wake the city. The most profound revolutions in human history so rarely begin with a loud noise. They begin in absolute, stunned silence. He steps back to a small wooden table resting against the wall of the balcony. A single candle burns inside a glass lantern, protecting the flame from the gentle night breeze. He picks up a quill and a pot of dark, sepia ink. He begins to paint the moon. Scratch, scratch, swoosh. He draws the jagged line of the terminator, the exact boundary where the bright lunar daylight meets the deep lunar night. He shades the deep craters with careful, cross-hatched lines. The sound of his quill is a soft, rhythmic whisper in the dark, a gentle, repeating cadence that anchors us to the stone balcony. The cool night air, the warm glow of the lantern, and the soft, repetitive scratching of the pen create a profound sense of peace. We will linger here, letting the quiet rhythm of his drawing carry us deeper into the soft, heavy embrace of the Italian night as the mountains of the moon are mapped for the very first time. The quiet rhythm of his drawing gently fades into the cool Italian night, the scratch of the quill blending perfectly with the soft, distant rustle of the olive trees in the wind. When I sit back and truly consider this moment, my mind always drifts to the massive, golden-mirrored space telescopes of our own era, hovering silently in the freezing void, searching for the faint, delicate atmospheric signatures of habitable exoplanets deep in the cosmic dark. It is deeply moving to realize that this monumental, ongoing human quest to understand the universe and find our place within it did not begin with roaring engines or immense modern technology. It began right here on a quiet stone balcony, with a solitary man looking through a simple piece of curved glass. We leave Galileo to his lunar maps, stepping back into the flowing river of time, moving just a few decades forward, but remaining under the warm, comforting blanket of the Italian night sky. We travel to Florence. It is the year 1643, and the air here is still and heavy. We enter a modest, incredibly neat brick-lined room, the private study of Evangelista, Torricelli. He was a brilliant student of Galileo, carrying the heavy torch of discovery after his master passed into the shadows. The room smells of dry parchment, polished brass, and something uniquely sharp and metallic, a scent that is entirely foreign to the natural world. A single, tall wax candle sits on a sturdy wooden table, casting a steady, unwavering pool of warm yellow light. Torricelli stands within this halo of light, completely still, looking down at a beautiful, strange apparatus he has carefully arranged on the heavy oak wood. He is attempting to measure something that every human being in history believed was completely invisible and entirely weightless. He is trying to weigh the sky. On the table rests a long, perfectly clear, slender tube of Venetian glass, closed at one end. Next to it sits a small, shallow porcelain basin. Both are filled with a substance that seems almost magical in the flickering candlelight. It is quicksilver, liquid mercury. It is a heavy, incredibly dense metal that somehow remains fluid at room temperature, pooling in the porcelain basin like a puddle of perfectly still, liquid moonlight. It does not wet the glass or the porcelain. It simply rolls against itself in thick, heavy, shimmering beads. Torricelli reaches out with careful, deliberate hands. He lifts the long glass tube, which is completely filled to the brim with the heavy liquid metal. The sheer physical weight of it strains his forearms. He places his thumb firmly over the open end, sealing the quicksilver inside. Listen to the soft, heavy shifting of the liquid metal. It is a dense, muffled sloshing sound, completely unlike the light, splashing sound of water. Glug, swish. He gently inverts the long glass tube, flipping it upside down, so his thumb is now at the bottom. He lowers his hand toward the porcelain basin, submerging his thumb and the open end of the glass tube entirely beneath the surface of the liquid mercury pooled in the bowl. He takes a slow, steady breath. The room is utterly silent. Then, he carefully slides his thumb away. Instantly, the heavy column of quicksilver inside the glass tube drops, but it does not empty completely. It falls a few inches and then suddenly stops, hanging suspended in the glass, perfectly balanced. I find this visual absolutely mesmerizing. The mercury in the tube simply hovers there, refusing to fall any further. And above the mercury, at the very top of the sealed glass tube, an entirely new environment has been created. A pure, perfect vacuum. A tiny pocket of absolute nothingness existing directly in the center of a crowded Italian city. Torricelli stares at the floating column of silver. His eyes wide with profound understanding, he realizes in this quiet, solitary moment that the liquid is not suspended by magic, nor by the vacuum above it. It is being held up by the physical, literal weight of the invisible ocean of air, pressing down on the mercury in the open basin outside the tube. He has just invented the barometer. He has proven that the empty air we breathe, the invisible breeze that moves the trees, has physical mass and weight. He reaches for a small piece of dark charcoal and a scrap of paper, making a quiet, scratching sound as he marks the exact height of the silver column. He knows that as the weather changes, as heavy storms roll in or clear skies open up, the invisible weight of the atmosphere will shift, and this floating pillar of silver will slowly rise and fall in response, breathing in perfect harmony with the earth itself. We will stay here in this quiet Florence room, watching the perfectly still surface of the liquid mercury reflect the warm, steady candle flame. The heavy, peaceful realization that we live securely at the bottom of a vast, protective ocean of air settles deeply into our chests, anchoring us and drawing us further down into a state of total, heavy relaxation. The floating pillar of silver slowly fades into the deep, quiet shadows of the Italian study, and we let the heavy weight of the atmosphere press us gently onward, slipping easily through the centuries. We travel north once again, leaving the still, warm Mediterranean winds far behind, trading them for the damp, rolling, sheep-covered hills of Nottinghamshire, England. The year is 1589. The night air here is thick and heavy, carrying the deep, earthy smell of wet soil, grazing fields, and the rich, smoky scent of a peat fire burning low in a stone hearth. We glide silently into a small, low-ceilinged, timber-framed cottage. Inside, the atmosphere is perfectly tuned to a slow, unhurried cadence, wrapped in the comforting warmth of isolation. Standing in the center of the room, taking up nearly half of the available floor space, is a complex, beautiful skeleton of carved wood and polished iron. This is the workshop of William Lee, a local clergyman, who is currently attempting something completely unprecedented. He is trying to teach a machine how to knit. When I reflect on this moment, it strikes me that we so often focus entirely on the grand cosmic discoveries, the star-gazing telescopes and the world-charting astrolabes. But there is an equally profound, beautiful genius in attempting to automate the quiet, boring chores of everyday village life. Hand knitting was one of the most fundamental, mundane daily tasks of the medieval and Renaissance era. It was a slow, repetitive looping of yarn by the fireside, a necessary chore to yield the essential layers of thick, warm clothing required to survive the biting English winters. William Lee wanted to take the slow, familiar rhythm of 2 wooden knitting needles and multiply it into a mechanical system of layered production. He sits heavily onto the wide wooden bench situated at the front of his invention, the stocking frame. He reaches down into a woven wicker basket at his feet and pulls up a thick, heavy spool of undyed, lanolin-rich sheep's wool. The smell of the natural lanolin is incredibly distinct. It is a heavy, oily, deeply soothing scent that perfectly matches the rustic environment of the cottage. He slowly, deliberately threads the coarse, pale yarn across a long, horizontal row of shining iron needles. These are not ordinary needles. He has spent years quietly filing them by hand, shaping them into delicate, bearded hooks designed to perfectly catch and hold the soft woolen thread. This is not a rough, chaotic machine of grinding gears. It is an instrument of extreme, delicate precision, built to perfectly mimic the exact, intricate pulling and looping motions of human fingers. He rests his hands gently on the wooden carriage, his worn leather shoes resting squarely on the heavy wooden treadles below. He presses his right foot down. Clack, swoosh, click. The sound is incredibly rhythmic. It establishes a perfect, continuous visual rhythm pattern as a series of intricately shaped metal plates, called sinkers, drop down between the needles, pushing the yarn into perfect, even loops. I absolutely love how this slow, mechanical sound completely fills the small cottage. It physically pushes back against the howling English wind, rattling the wooden shutters, replacing the wild noise of the storm with the warm, predictable lullaby of human industry. Clack, swoosh, click. It acts as a heavy, mechanical heartbeat, steady and completely unwavering. Watch closely how the fabric grows in the dim, flickering orange light of the peat fire. With every slow, deliberate press of the wooden pedal, a perfect, uniform row of interlocking loops is instantly created, yielding a flawless, continuous layer of knitted wool that slowly descends from the iron needles toward his knees. The repetitive, side-to-side motion of his arms, guiding the carriage, is deeply hypnotic. The eye naturally follows the smooth sweep of his hands, back and forth, caught in a beautiful, swaying trance. It must have seemed like absolute magic to the local villagers, watching a week's worth of tedious, finger-atching evening work materialize in a matter of quiet hours. The heat from the hearth warms the natural oils in the wool, releasing a soft, sweet fragrance that mixes heavily with the wood smoke. The thick, pale fabric continues to grow, inch by inch, pooling softly on the wooden floorboards beneath the machine like a puddle of warm cream. Lee's breathing slowly falls perfectly into sync with the machine. Inhale on the sweeping of the carriage. Exhale on the pressing of the pedal. Clack, swoosh, click. We will stay here in the warm, dim shadows of the English cottage for a long while. We can let the heavy, rhythmic sounds of the iron needles and the wooden treadle wash over us, feeling the tension slowly draining out of our own muscles, sinking deeper and deeper into a state of warm, deeply layered, uninterrupted rest. The rhythmic, heavy heartbeat of the iron needles slowly fades into the deep English fog, and we find ourselves lifting gently once more, carrying the warm scent of spun wool with us across the English Channel. Our journey takes us to the grand, imposing city of Paris in the year 1588. We are leaving the modest, smoky timber cottages behind and entering a space of profound, cavernous silence. We glide through the thick, towering oak doors of a royal library. The air here is instantly heavy and still, thick with the intoxicating, dry perfume of thousands of leather-bound manuscripts, aged vellum, and the sweet, lingering aroma of beeswax wood polish. In the center of this vast, moonlit room stands an invention of pure, magnificent mechanical elegance. It is large enough to touch the high vaulted ceiling, constructed entirely of richly polished, dark mahogany and gleaming brass gears. This is the workshop of Agostino Ramelli, a brilliant military engineer who has turned his mind from the loud, chaotic machines of war to the quiet, solitary sanctuary of the scholar. When I think about the sheer volume of knowledge that was exploding out of the Gutenberg presses across Europe during this era, I often consider the physical toll it took on the scholars to maximize their intellectual yield, to physically cross-reference 3 or 4 massive, heavy books at the exact same time without breaking their backs. They needed an entirely new kind of workflow. They needed a machine that could manage the heavy lifting of reading. Ramelli sits in a plush, high-backed velvet chair at the base of his masterpiece, the rotary reading desk, or the book wheel. It looks like a miniature, incredibly intricate water wheel, but instead of wooden paddles churning river water, it holds angled, beautifully carved wooden shelves. Resting open on these shelves are massive, iron-clasped philosophical texts and heavy astronomical tables. Ramelli reaches out with a gentle hand and grasps one of the smooth wooden spokes of the wheel. Listen to the deep, resonant sound it makes as he pulls. Creak, clack, hum. The massive wheel begins to rotate downward. It is a slow, majestic movement, heavy with the weight of hundreds of pounds of paper and wood. But the true genius of the machine, the secret hidden within its beautiful geometry, is the epicyclic gearing, hidden inside the wooden side panels. As the main wheel turns, a complex system of smaller, interlocking wooden cogs ensures that every single bookshelf remains perfectly, precisely flat. It is deeply satisfying to watch. The heavy books simply glide through the air in a perfect circle, never tipping, never closing, coming to a gentle stop directly in front of his eyes. He leans forward, tracing a line of Latin text with a silver reading pointer. He does not need to close the heavy tome, move it, and heave another one onto his desk. He simply reads, absorbs the knowledge, and then reaches out to gently pull the wheel again. Creak, clack, hum. The next book descends from the shadows above, bathed instantly in the warm, yellow halo of his reading candle. The slow, repetitive rotation of the wheel is deeply hypnotic. It is a carousel of human thought, a slow, turning cycle that lulls the mind into a state of profound, structured peace. We will sit here in the heavy, fragrant silence of the Parisian library for a while longer, letting the slow creak of the wooden gears and the soft turning of the ancient pages carry us effortlessly into a deeper, heavier state of sleep. The slow creak of the wooden gears gradually fades into the quiet darkness, and we let the heavy leather tomes close one by one leaving the cavernous Parisian library far behind us. We drift southward once more, drawn by the warmth of the Mediterranean, arriving in the vibrant coastal city of Naples, Italy. The year is 1558, and it is just before dawn. We are not entering a workshop filled with heavy iron gears, roaring furnaces, or swinging pendulums. We are stepping into a space defined entirely by its absolute, profound emptiness. It is a room that has been meticulously, completely sealed against the outside world. This is the quiet sanctuary of Giambattista della Porta, a scholar of optics and natural philosophy. The room is incredibly dark. Heavy, dense wool tapestries have been securely nailed over the wooden window shutters, blocking out even the faintest sliver of the approaching morning light. The air smells slightly dusty, mixed with the faint, sweet scent of the lemon groves breathing just outside the thick stone walls. When I consider this specific moment, it feels almost beautifully contradictory. To truly see the world, Della Porta realized he first had to completely plunge himself into absolute, unwavering darkness. He is sitting silently on a simple wooden stool, facing a massive, blank wall of perfectly smooth white plaster. He does not have a telescope or a complex array of polished mirrors. He holds only a small, sharp iron awl. He turns toward the heavy wooden shutter, covering the only window in the chamber. With a slow, deliberate motion, he presses the sharp iron tip into a thin piece of soft lead resting over a crack in the wood. Twist, scrape, pop. He creates a single, tiny, perfectly round hole. It is no larger than a grain of wheat. Instantly, a tight, concentrated beam of brilliant morning sunlight pierces the gloom, cutting through the dusty indoor air like a glowing, golden thread. I find the natural physics of light to be incredibly soothing, a silent, mathematical dance that happens constantly all around us, entirely unnoticed. As the light travels through that tiny aperture, it crosses over itself, entering the room in an expanding cone. He turns back to face the blank white plaster wall. He does not paint. He does not draw. He simply sits with his hands resting quietly on his knees, and he watches. It takes a moment for our eyes to fully adjust to the dimness. But slowly, miraculously, an image begins to bloom across the cold, white stone. It is not a static painting. It is alive. The entire city of Naples is being quietly, perfectly projected onto the wall in full, vibrant color, completely upside down. The deep blue of the bay, the red terra-cotta rooftops, the dark green of the distant, swaying pines. All of it washes over the plaster in total silence. We can see the ghostly shadows of seabirds flying inverted across the bottom of the wall, their wings beating silently against the stone floor. We can see the gentle rippling of the ocean waves washing across the ceiling. The camera obscura, the dark chamber, has captured the living world and brought it inside, rendering it harmless, silent, and beautifully surreal. Della Porta sits perfectly still, a dark silhouette against the glowing, moving tapestry of inverted light. The absolute silence of the room, contrasted with the silent, upside-down motion of the city on the wall, creates a profoundly hypnotic experience. It is a dreamlike state, a gentle inversion of reality that invites us to let go of our own waking logic and surrender to the strange, beautiful mechanics of the universe. We will remain here in the cool, dark chamber for a while, watching the upside-down waves gently roll across the ceiling, letting the silent, glowing projection carry our minds deeper and deeper into a beautiful, weightless, uninterrupted rest. The silent, upside-down projection of Naples slowly dissolves into the absolute blackness of the Italian room, and we let the cool darkness wrap around us, carrying us northward one final time, before the night is entirely over. The sweet smell of the lemon groves fades, replaced by the crisp, freezing winter air of The Hague in the Netherlands. It is 1659. The canals outside are frozen solid, covered in a thick layer of pristine, untouched white snow that softly reflects the faint light of the moon. We glide through the thick brick walls of a stately Dutch manor house, slipping into a deeply quiet, heavily draped study. In the center of this dark room, sitting at a beautifully polished mahogany table, is the brilliant astronomer and physicist Christian Huygens. He is enveloped in a thick, dark woolen coat, rubbing his hands together gently to chase away the deep winter chill. When I trace the long, winding path of human imagination, it always amazes me how our desire to tell stories constantly drives our engineering. We began by drawing animals on the stone walls of caves, with burnt wood relying on the flickering light of a fire to make them seem alive. Tonight, in this freezing Dutch room, Huygens is taking that ancient human desire and merging it perfectly with the precision of Renaissance optics. He reaches into a leather pouch, resting on the table, and pulls out a small, rectangular pane of perfectly clear glass. With extreme care, he holds it by its very edges. He has spent the afternoon painstakingly painting a miniature scene onto the glass, using very thin, highly translucent oil paints. It is a tiny, beautiful depiction of a solitary wooden windmill standing quietly under a starry night sky. The colors are incredibly vibrant: deep cobalt blues, warm ambers, and stark, frosty whites. He sets the glass down on a velvet cloth and turns his attention to a fascinating object resting heavily in the center of the table. It is a beautifully constructed box made of dark, aged wood and polished brass. It has a tall, elegantly curved metal chimney protruding from the top and a long brass tube extending from the front, containing a series of carefully ground convex lenses. He opens a small metal door on the side of the box, striking a flint and carefully lighting a small, reservoir-fed oil lamp hidden inside. The sharp, earthy smell of the burning lamp oil quickly fills the small room, a deeply comforting, domestic scent that pushes back against the bitter cold of the Dutch winter. The light lamp is entirely trapped inside the wooden box, except for the powerful, concentrated beam shining straight out through the brass lens tube, hitting the blank wall opposite him. He picks up the small, painted pane of glass. He slides it gently into a narrow, perfectly sized wooden slot situated exactly between the burning oil lamp and the brass lenses. Listen to the sound of the glass sliding against the wood. Shh! Clack. It is a soft, precise, highly satisfying sound. In an instant, the dark, empty wall of the study is entirely transformed. The tiny painted windmill is no longer resting on the table. It is towering over him, projected brilliantly against the plaster. Glowing with warm, artificial light, the stars in the painted sky seem to actually twinkle as the flame of the oil lamp naturally flickers inside the dark wooden box. He has created the Lanterna Magica, the magic lantern. It is the very first projector, the ancient, quiet ancestor of every movie theater that will ever exist. He sits back in his chair, completely mesmerized by the glowing image on the wall. The heavy brass chimney of the lantern begins to radiate a wonderful, steady warmth, heating the cold air of the room. We can see the faint, delicate wisps of heat rising from the metal, warping the air slightly. We will stay here in the quiet, freezing Dutch night, letting the soft, warm glow of the projected windmill and the gentle, rhythmic flickering of the oil lamp wash over us. The smell of the warm brass and the hot oil lulls us into a deeply peaceful state, anchoring our minds perfectly as we prepare for the final stage of our journey into the deepest, heaviest sleep. The gentle, rhythmic flickering of the magic lantern slowly begins to settle, the small reservoir of oil finally burning down to the very end of its cotton wick. The tiny, vibrant painted windmill, projected against the plaster wall, dims, its deep cobalt blues and warm ambers fading into a soft, hazy shadow. With a final, quiet sputter, the tiny flame extinguishes, and the Dutch study is gently returned to the absolute, peaceful embrace of the dark. As we sit here in the heavy quiet of the room, surrounded by the faint, comforting scent of extinguished lamp oil and cooling brass, I cannot help but reflect on the incredible, sweeping journey we have taken together across this vast, sleeping continent. We have walked as invisible guests through the deepest, most creative shadows of history. We have stepped silently over the uneven cobblestones of Florence, braved the freezing snows of Poland, and breathed in the heavy, salty fogs of the English and Venetian coastlines. When I look closely at the frantic, endless noise of the modern world we live in today, a world entirely filled with glowing digital screens, and the constant demand for instant answers, I find a profound, anchoring peace in remembering these solitary figures of the Renaissance. They did not operate under the crushing weight of modern expectations, nor did they seek the immediate roar of a crowd. They simply had the gift of uninterrupted time, the sanctuary of dark, isolated rooms, and an unyielding, incredibly quiet curiosity. I find it deeply moving to realize that they were just ordinary human beings who chose to sit alone in the night, patiently filing cold iron, grinding wet sand against glass, and carving intricate lines into blocks of pear wood, completely unaware that their quiet, repetitive labor was slowly, surely, building the entire foundation of the world as we know it. But their magnificent work is finally done for tonight. Across the entirety of Europe, the heavy doors of the workshops have been pulled shut and bolted from the inside. The beeswax candles have all burned down to small, hardened pools of fragrant wax, leaving the wooden desks bathed only in the pale, silver light of the moon. The massive, imposing oak beams of the Gutenberg printing presses are completely silent and still. The dark, viscous linseed ink drying slowly on the hanging parchment in the cool night air. The roaring brick furnaces of the glassmakers in Murano have been banked down to softly glowing, sleeping red embers, safely contained until the morning. The heavy, intricate brass astrolabes and precise mathematical compasses are resting heavily in their velvet-lined wooden boxes, their cold metal surfaces untouched by human hands. The beautiful giant wooden book wheels stand perfectly motionless in the cavernous, shadowy libraries, the massive leather-bound tomes closed tight, their brass clasps locked. The sharp steel gouges, the fine badger hair paintbrushes, and the raw cedar pencils have all been laid to rest upon the scarred wooden workbenches, dusted with wood shavings and crushed lapis lazuli. Outside the thick, draped windows of the Dutch manor house, the deep, velvet black canopy of the night sky is just beginning to soften. A faint, bruised purple light is touching the very edge of the eastern horizon, slowly chasing the stars away, signaling the slow, inevitable approach of a new dawn across the continent. But the sun has not arrived yet. The world is deeply, completely wrapped in the heavy, protective blanket of profound sleep. The inventors, the map-makers, the anatomists, and the stargazers are all resting securely in their beds. Their hands remain stained with dark sepia ink, silvery graphite dust, and reddish brass polish, their chests rising and falling in a slow, steady, incredibly peaceful rhythm. I think it is time we join them in that rest. You have traveled far tonight, allowing your mind to drift back through the centuries, bearing witness to the quiet birth of magnificent miracles. Your imagination is full of warm candlelight, the earthy smell of dried botanical herbs, the mesmerizing slide of polished optical tubes, and the soothing, rhythmic sweeping of charcoal on thick, woven paper. Let all of these heavy, comforting historical sensations sink deeply into your muscles, weighting your arms and legs down into your mattress. Let the vast, quiet expanse of the past wrap securely around you. There is absolutely nothing left to invent tonight. There is no problem left to solve, no map left to draw, and no sky left to measure. There is only the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing, echoing the quiet, steady ticking of a tiny, brilliant brass clock in a distant, shadowed room. Let go of the waking world entirely. Allow yourself to slip away. Rest now, safely and completely, in the deep, uninterrupted peace of history.